If you've been playing chess for at least a few months, you've probably faced the famous fried liver attack quite a lot. Maybe you googled this, how do I counter the fried liver? And there are different ways, but today I'd love to share with you the way that works the best. What happens here is that in most cases black goes pawn d5 to cover this diagonal, and after this trade, those who are unfamiliar with the theory play knight takes d5, which falls for the fried liver, sacrifice, knight takes f7, followed by queen f3. Those who are aware of the theory usually play knight a5, trying to push back this bishop. But actually the move with the highest win rate for black is neither knight d5 nor knight to a5. It is the move knight to d4, which is something that your opponents are probably completely unaware of, and it's really good. So, what will your opponent play here after you jump knight to d4? Well, there are two kind of obvious options for white. We're going to cover both. The first thing is the white can try to persist in his idea to get to this f7 pawn, and white may realize that, hey, this diagonal is currently blocked by the pawn, but all it takes for me is just to push the pawn forward, and I renew this massive threat to the pawn. So that's the first thing that comes to mind. And players rated below 1700 will usually play the move like this. But strangely enough, there's a really powerful counter here. After queen takes d6, here white realizes that, hey, I can grab it with the bishop and win a pawn, but if I take it with the knight, that's even stronger, because that's a fork to the queen and the rook, so I'm just winning. But you play queen to c6, and that turns the table around. So what's the catch here? Well, from c6, the queen attacks this bishop. The bishop cannot move away because it has to guard the knight. On top of that, your queen is also countering this g2 pawn, which is also very unpleasant. Usually your opponents will decide to bite the bullet and grab this rook because they have nothing else to do anyway. Then you play queen takes g2, attacking this rook, threatening queen takes h1, so rook f1 is more or less forced. Then you slide back to e4, delivering this check to the king, and notice that your knight covers this square, therefore they cannot play queen e2, that would give up the queen. So they cover by the bishop, still thinking that they are up a rook, but that fails to a really beautiful knight to f3, smothered checkmate because the bishop is pinned. There is also another variation that you're going to use to win plenty of the games. In this position we discussed that knight takes h8 fails to queen takes g2, which leads to a very beautiful checkmate. Some of your opponents will realize that your queen attacks this bishop and will instead decide to play d3, which looked kind of solid. White is just solidifying his position. You still play the same move, queen takes g2, attacking the rook, white still plays rook to f1. And here's the difference. You can no longer play queen e4 check because it's controlled by the pawn. So what do you do then? Well, you've got another way to deliver your attack. It's bishop to g4, hitting the queen this way. The only square for the queen to go to is queen d2, but that fails to knight to f3. In the previous example, in the previous variation, knight f3 was delivered in a checkmate. Here it's not yet the checkmate, but it's still very strong. It's forking the king and the queen, and after the king moves, in most games black simply wins the queen right here, knight takes d2. And that certainly wins the game. You grab the queen, then you grab the rook, and you win the game easily. But surprisingly, knight takes d2 is not even the strongest move in the position. So let it be our puzzle of the day. If you can find the winning shot for black here, write it down in the comments below. Okay, that covers knight takes f7, which fails to queen c6 with a massive counterattack. How about bishop takes f7? Does that just win a pawn for white? Not really, because after king to e7, white faces all the same problems. These minor pieces are somewhat shaky. You want to play h6, kick the knight away, and then simply win this bishop. Overall, white is underdeveloped, while you are already creating some threats, so that's actually a pretty bad situation for white anyway. Bishop's got to go back to not being captured, and after bishop to b3, you trade it off, because white has very few active pieces, and then you start chasing this knight away. h6, after knight f3 you go e4, the knight has no good squares to go to, it feels very bad and passive to go back to g1. They go knight h4, you gotta be careful, you gotta watch over this knight g6, forking your king and rook, so king f7 is a nice move that covers this square and also puts your king to a better position anyway. And now, in most cases, your opponents will blunder the fact that you're threatening g5, capturing this knight. It has nowhere to go, your bishop takes away this square. So in most cases, they'll play some random move, you go g5, and you win the knight for nothing. In this game, white decided to play g3, he noticed the threat and provided an escape square for his knight. But after g5 and knight to g2, it turned out that black could play bishop g4, and all of a sudden this queen was trapped and white lost the game anyway. And here's a promised game when this variation was used against Bobby Fischer. Fischer was playing white here, and he played the move pawn to c3. Fischer certainly didn't go for the trap, which d6, which fails for white, so he played c3, chasing away this knight. But here, you do not want to move the knight back. I mean, you could, but it's just passive, right? And we want to counterattack. And black has another interesting move, pawn to b5, which says, hey, you want to take my knight? Cool, I'm gonna take your bishop. And here Fischer played another good move, bishop f1, which is a move that you'll rarely face, honestly, but it's the best move according to the computer. It's bishop f1, which saves this bishop, and he wants to grab this pawn after the knight goes away. But here you can surprise white once again. You still don't touch your knight, you instead counter-strike once again, with this time with knight takes d5. And although it looks like you're blundering a knight, but you're gonna get white's knight as well after queen takes g5. Here bishop can indeed go ahead and take the pawn, chase the king, looks really advantageous for white. But somehow black still has a very powerful attack here, because after king d8, looks like your king is centralized and weak, but the matter of the fact that white's king is weak just as well, and maybe even more so. Because in most cases, white will castle here in order to defend this pawn on g2. Now, Fischer played another move, he played queen f3, we'll come to that in a second. But most of your opponents will castle, and after bishop b7, you're ready to put together a quick checkmate on the g2 square. So your knight just needs to move somewhere, knight e3, knight f4, and then queen takes g2 with the support of this bishop would be a checkmate. So you'll win a lot of games like that. Fischer was aware of this thing, and he played queen to f3 so that he, protects the g2 square and takes control of this diagonal. Black played bishop b7, here Fischer castled, Black took the pawn on d4, so far so good, and Fischer played queen takes f7. Perhaps he was hoping that he's gonna checkmate black in one of these two ways, and that he's winning the game, but suddenly, after knight f6, he just resigned. So Fischer figured out that, well, this seemingly modest move knight f6 did a couple nasty things. So first it opens up these diagonals. Queen takes g2 threat is real. Besides that, black is threatening to take this bishop with a queen, and if that's not enough, you could play a bishop d5, and actually this queen has nowhere to go, so you can trap the queen. It's quite a rare case that a move knight f6 and an opening leads to white's resignation, but that was the case. Now, to Fischer's excuse, he played this game in a simul, so maybe he just underestimated his opponent. But anyway, it just goes to show that even for a player of Fischer's caliber, it's still not easy to face this line. That said, it is true that you cannot really become a strong chess player just by playing aggressive gambits and opening traps, because chess primarily is a strategic game. So if you want to learn chess strategy, I've got a quick free masterclass that you can check out by clicking right there or down below in the description of the video and learn that skill. Hope you enjoyed this video. Talk to you soon. Take care.